got to point in the sessions, and the engineer said, okay, well, everything's done. Like, you accomplished everything you needed to do, but you have an extra half hour of studio time booked. And so I just looked at them and said, can we record one of my songs? And they said, yeah, show it to us.
That's Andy Aledort. He's back to talk about his new album, Light of Love. I'm Jamie Green, and this is Trading Fours.
I'm going to Kansas City, here I come. Oh yeah, I'm going to Kansas.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Trading Fours, episode 101. I'm your host, Jamie Green, and today we have the great guitarist, writer, and all-around good egg, Andy Aledort. He has returned to talk about his brand new double album, Light of Love. We're going to delve into that momentarily, but first, let's get updated on some things. First and foremost, thank you all so much for the nice notes and emails about the 100th episode. It was really kind of you to take the time. As I've stated before, the podcast is a labor of love. I do it because I get a kick out of it. And a large portion of why, besides the obvious geeking out about music and musicians, is the connections I get to make not only with the guests on the show, but with the audience who listens to it. So, thank you. If you've not done so already, please give my podcast rating a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps to generate traffic. And I'm really excited to tell you that I, the schmo with the show, Jamie Green, will be headed to Los Angeles in June to attend NAMM. For those of you that don't know, NAMM is the premier music conference in the country, probably in the world. I've been wanting to attend NAMM literally for decades, just ask my wife and kids. So I was beyond thrilled to get an invite as a media member. That means I'm going to go out there not only to gawk and salivate all over amazing guitars, amplifiers, and effects. I better bring a second bag just to carry shit home, but also for the chance to interview a bunch of industry heavy hitters. As we get closer to June, I'll have much more details, but suffice it to say, it's going to be really freaking cool. Speaking of really freaking cool, how about today's guest, Andy Aledort? Andy is a guitar guru, a man who has played with, transcribed, or interviewed just about every single important guitarist of the past 50 years. He knows everybody. But there's no ego to this guy. He's just a genuinely nice guy, extremely funny human being. He's been on before to discuss his book about Stevie Ray, and also to weigh in about the passing of Eddie Van Halen, but we've never really got the chance to talk about his music. Yes, he's recorded, performed, and released a bunch of original music over the years. And this latest is Light of Love, which almost took 3 decades to finally put it all together. But no spoilers, Andy's going to tell you why. I've had the chance to listen to it several times, and you're going to really dig it. We delve into the new album, but of course, inevitably, we had to talk about Stevie Ray and so much more. We're guitar nerds. That's how it goes. But even if you're not, you're really going to enjoy this conversation. So let's get started. Here's my conversation with Andy Aledort.
So, for example, like, they send me the spin report once a week, and I think it's, Q103 in Seattle plays my song Out for a Ride 20 times a day.
That's great.
That's crazy. That's like almost once an hour. That's too many times. If you were to listen to the station all day, you'd be like, oh my God, they're playing that song again. Jesus. So, anyway.
The DJ wants to kill you, man. The DJ's like, Jesus Christ, do I have to play this again?
And then the other part of it is, so with all these streams and all these spins, pretty soon they'll send me a check so that I'll be able to buy like a slice of pizza and like a small Coke or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you're lucky. Well, I think it's interesting, and I was thinking of a lot of things of what to ask you to start with, but I'm curious, since you have done so much and had worn so many different hats in your career. So do you think people mostly know you from the guitar world? Is it now because of the book? Is it from Dickie Betts? Is it with Buddy Miles? When people like say, oh, Andy Aledort, I know that guy from, what's the answer to that? Where do they know you from the most?
You left out when I was musical director for Leslie Gore.
Yeah. Well, see, that's what I'm saying. You have like 1,000 hats.
She's the only person that knows me from that. No, I mean, it's definitely the magazine and the instructional DVDs and the transcription books, because that goes, and the transcriptions in the guitar magazine. So everything guitar magazine related, because it goes back so far. It's, that started in 1985. It's 37 years ago. And so, for example, one of the ways I have a read on how people know me or are familiar with me, if they are, our Twitter promotion that we do, James, it's basically like telemarketing. It's just scattershot. I don't know how many people he hits a day. It's hundreds of people a day. It just goes out into the Twitterverse, and some of those people choose to write back to me. It's all direct messages. And I can't tell you how many people write, "Oh, I can't believe it's you. Like, I learned how to play guitar from you, and I read all your articles in the magazines." I mean, it's everything from someone who doesn't know me at all, it's almost like half and half. They don't know me. The responses, in either case, to the music have been tremendous. So they don't need to know me not to like me. They seem to like me even if they don't know me. But then the other side of that is all these people saying, "I bought your Jimi Hendrix Sax as Bold as Love DVD, how to play those songs when it came out 20 years ago, 25 years ago." Wait, that one was actually only 16 years ago, something like that. So I would say the transcriptions in the magazines, the articles in the magazines, and the instructional DVDs is how people know me the most. But then I get people who say, "I saw you play with Dickie Betts on this occasion in this city. I saw you on the Jimi Hendrix tribute tour." Or, "I grew up with your cousin." You know, do you
That's the
know
weird
the
one.
do you know the Aledorts from Jericho? That was one the other day, and I'm like, "Yes, they are my cousins." So that's what's so crazy about Twitter.
Some of it's like you said, it's really cool. You'll hear from somebody that you didn't expect. And it's really nice and it's a nice note and it makes your day. But it's totally egalitarian because part of it too is like you're gonna hear from everybody.
I've also, just so people don't get the wrong idea, it's been a very low percentage. But someone wrote, first comment was, "This isn't really the style of music I like." Like, some time went by, and then her second comment was, "The lyrics aren't good." So I'm glad it's not her style of music anyway.
That's
Like,
funny.
God forbid, if it was the kind of music she liked, and then she didn't like the lyrics.
It really bummed me out.
That would have been worse. So she already
Well,
doesn't like it.
yeah, everybody has an opinion. So I was gonna say, you've been on before. We talked Stevie Ray Vaughan book for the most part the first time, and
Yes,
then
and
you were
thank you very much, James. Much appreciated.
oh, well, you know me. He's why I picked the guitar up. So there's, that was the easiest sell ever.
You're a good
Uh,
talker,
yeah. And then second, we obviously after Eddie Van Halen passed away, but this is the first time we're really going to get to talk about you and your music, which is cool. And obviously the album was out, Light of Love. We just talked about it. It seems like it's going really well.
Yes.
I read, Andy, 28 years. It was 28 years from beginning to finish. Is that accurate? How long did this start? Like the first track that's on there until that, and that you had a lot of this was with drum tracks, and you said, "No, I'm going to do it with real drums." Give me the background.
Where I am sitting right now is my office in my house that I bought. My wife and I bought this house 30 years and 2 months ago in 1992. And shortly thereafter, by probably 1994, I had a little studio in this room to make demos, little 8-track recording equipment. A DA-88 was like the latest, and, you got to buy one of those. It was sort of, people were using ADATs, and I was going to buy an ADAT, and then somebody said, no, this is Tascam's putting out this machine, you should buy it. And the machine was phenomenal until it died, and then realized that nobody wanted to fix them, etc. But I started recording songs in 94, and some of those songs ended up on my first album, Put a Sock in It, which came out in 1999. And then in the early 2000s, I started to record original music in some different studios with different musicians with the intention of, I'm going to make a record. I didn't intend to wait what ended up. Well, let's say I made my record in 99, so I didn't intend to wait 23 years to make another studio album. I went into the studio in 2002 and 2003 like I was thinking I'm working on a record right now. But it just didn't happen. Finances were one of the reasons, primary reason, because to do the record the way I really wanted to, I knew was going to cost money. And then I ended up, in 2005, Dickie Betts hired me to be his guitar player, and I played with him for 10 years. And so between the guitar magazines and the instructional videos and playing with Dickie and touring with Dickie, and then the Hendrix tours were happening concurrently, it sort of pushed it definitely to the back burner of like, I'll make a record, I guess, eventually. I was very busy and I wasn't even writing songs that much. But, kept writing, and so there was this body of songs, like on the 8-track tapes, that started getting recorded in the early 90s, and they didn't end up on a record. And then in 2008, I took my band into the studio, a friend of mine's studio, Phil Maniatti, up in Connecticut. We did 2 full days, recorded 15 songs in 2 days. That was 2008. And that was really, like a more concerted effort, like, we're making a record. Just one thing led to another. It just got complicated and didn't happen. So instead, Phil was co-owner of a restaurant that we played often in Pound Ridge, New York, next to New Canaan, Connecticut, called North Star. So he recorded us live, and I put out a live CD called Andy Aledort, The Groove Kings Live at North Star. Because it was like, well, we have all these tracks, we have 15 songs, they need a lot of work, and this is going to take time, and when are you going to come back? And it was like, and like I said, 2008, I was touring, and he was like, I'll just record you guys live, like the next 3 gigs. We played every month. And then we'll go through them and, like, pick enough tunes for a record. So that led to the sort of stopgap, like, well, here's a record, and then we'll get to all that other headache later. But then he moved, and then he didn't have a studio anymore. So this is why it just sort of didn't happen. In 2018, my mom passed away. She was 94. It's just my sister and I, when we sold her house, I actually had some money to put into making a record like the way I really wanted to make a record. A guy named Bob Stander is a fantastic musician, engineer, someone that I've been friends with for 45 years, like since 77. He worked at a lot of different recording studios over all these years. We've been friends all these years. But he's one of those guys, he was also very busy, and our schedules just never... James, I probably saw him 10 times in 45 years. But I didn't think of him as any less of a friend than the same for him. We just never saw each other. Like, if 10 years went by, I'd be like, Bob, what's up? And then another 10 years would go by. I have a saying that procrastination sometimes is your best friend. And in this case, it was. Because Bob, eventually, about 20 years ago, after working in all these different studios and working with tons of people and becoming a better and better producer, engineer, Grammy-winning producer, by the way, he kept improving his home studio. And 3 years ago, he put in a $110,000 API board. That's the sickest thing you ever saw in your life. So finally, and he's very busy too, so, with a lot of projects. So in the summer, this past summer, I said, let's get together. I need to make this record. The first thing was I had to fix my machines. The DA88 had to get fixed so I could bounce off those tapes into Pro Tools, into digital form, a lot of these songs. And my DA30 DAT machine had songs that was the only incarnation of the song. There was no 8-track version of the song. One of those songs on the record is called Wyatt's Tune, that I forgot existed. So I got the machines fixed. I put tapes in that I hadn't listened to in 20 years. And I'm hearing songs that I totally forgot about, And so there was that part of the experience, like, oh, there's this and there's this. Like, I completely forgot about a song called Wonder that's on the record. And Wyatt's Tune I'd totally forgotten about. So the machines had to get fixed. They got fixed. Now I had access to all this material. And then it dawned on me, like, this needs to be a double album. If I really want to address the conundrum of, here's all these songs, let's put them out in the universe so that we can then make another record later of new songs. Believe me, this isn't all the old songs, but it was, the ones I liked the most and felt that were the strongest. So a song like Lost and Lonely is probably from 1995 or 6. I mean, it's a really long time ago. And so those songs, the earliest ones, was just a drum machine and me, 2 guitars, a bass, that's it. So when we finally were able to bounce that stuff over into digital format, I put it on drives, brought it over to Bob's. We got my drummer, a guy named Sam Bryant, who played with Kenny Wayne Shepherd for years. He did the first 2 tours. He might even be on those records, I'm not sure. He still tours with Kenny, because Kenny's regular drummer for the last 10, 15 years has been Chris Layton from Double Trouble. If Chris can't make a gig, Sammy still goes and does the gig. Tremendous drummer from South Carolina. So he came to Bob's, put real drums on all these songs that I had just cut to a drum machine. This process began that took 4.5 months. Like the title track, Light of Love, didn't need anything. It just needed to be mixed. So the songs are in all these different stages of how close to done are they. Light of Love needed to be mixed. Save Something for Me needed to be mixed. I thought I was going to redo the vocals, and then we sat there and went, you know what? They're actually good. I was going to redo the solo. I was like, maybe it's good, But other songs, definitely, I re-sung from scratch, put new guitars on, put new solos, changed the arrangement. Like, it gave me the opportunity to be a completely insane OCD obsessive maniac, which is the story unto itself. But we come out the other side 4.5 months later, and broke. And the record, I think the record's great. So it was worth it, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. I mean, it used to be you couldn't do a double album because the record company would balk, right? They'd be like, "Why are we? It's only 1 unit. Make it 2 units. Don't make it." But now, with we were just talking about digital, it doesn't really matter.
Well, something else that has been pointed out to me, which is sort of funny, is that these days people release one song because it's so ephemeral. Like with social media and everything else, like something happens. And it's basically like a split second that it happens. And then tomorrow, not even, like you got the morning, and then by the afternoon, it's like, we don't really care what happened this morning. We're already on this afternoon. It used to be a shock that it was a 24-hour news cycle. It's like a 24-second news cycle now, right?
Yeah, nobody has an attention span anymore.
No, because every second you're on Twitter going, what's going on? It didn't happen like 1 second ago.
Right.
And so it was just funny. Somebody said to me, hey, you have a lot of balls in this day and age when every single person puts out one song because nobody has an attention span. You put out an 18-song double album, like, here you go. Have fun.
Well, that's cool, though.
Well, I don't know what to say. I'm a child of my era, and there were a lot of double albums that came out, between 1966 and 1972.
Could you be a kid in the 70s without Phantom Comes Alive? Could you not? You had to have it, right? You had to own it. I mean, I still have mine.
Do you remember what Wayne says in Wayne's World?
No, what does he say?
Cassandra, his girlfriend, because she's Korean or something, like she didn't know the album. She's like, oh, Wayne, have you heard this record? Frampton Comes Alive. It's really good. And he goes, are you kidding? In the 70s, this was government issue.
Yeah, it kind of was.
I didn't need to buy it because it was, everywhere you went, it was either on the radio or everyone was playing it. I have to throw in, just because it's fun, when I was out playing with Dickie Betts, we shared the bill with Peter Frampton once in Lansing, Michigan. Dickie Betts and Great Southern shared the bill with Peter Frampton in Lansing, Michigan. Anyone who might be familiar with Lansing, Michigan may also be familiar with a infamous instrument shop in East Lansing, Michigan called Elderly Instruments, which is world renowned. And I think it was a Sunday, and they opened the store just for us, which I always, I heard about it in the 70s. We had in Staten Island a place called Mandolin Brothers, which was also this infamous place. or some people knew Matt Umanoff's Guitar Shop on Bleecker Street. These are these infamous New York vintage instrument shops that opened in the 70s. And Elderly was like that in East Lansing. So anyway, that's the only thing I knew about Lansing, Michigan, or East Lansing was this place, Elderly Instruments, and we got to go over there, and it was everything it was cracked up to be. But here's the point about Peter. It's the afternoon, we're sitting on the bus, and there's like a knock on the door, and it was Peter Frampton. And he just came on the bus by himself, and he was like, "Oh, I just wanted to say hello. Like, this is so great. You guys, we're sharing the bill together. Nicest person you could ever meet. Terrific guy." So anyway, one of the first double albums, the first two double albums I remember is from when I was 10 in 1966. Freak Out by Frank Zappa, and Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan.
Yep.
Both albums that I loved and listened to constantly. And then, the Beatles' White Album came out shortly after that. And Electric Ladyland is my favorite record of all time, which is a double album.
Yep.
Second Winter is kind of a double album, three-sided album, right? So the double album thing is something that, on a subconscious level, I can totally relate to. There's this disc. We don't turn them over anymore, but like this disc has this stuff. Oh, but then you could listen to the other one, like it has, or the Allman Brothers, Phil Maurice, live at Phil Maurice is a double album. You know what I mean? Like you'd pull the record out and you'd have to decide.
Yeah.
Am I going to listen to that one, which has all those songs, or am I going to listen to that one?
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. Exit Stage Left for me, because that was, I was a huge Rush person, and their live album.
Right.
There's another one that just probably my, and I'm a guitar player. I don't really care about drum solos, but Neil's drum solos always interested me, and that's my favorite of all his drum solos. That one on that album is my favorite. And it's right in the middle of YYZ too, so they go into it and they come right back out, which is cool.
Right.
So you know me. I'm gonna have to ask because, as you know, I'm a huge Stevie Ray head. So you got to record. I mean, I love you. You're great, but I kind of hate you a little bit too, because you're like, oh yeah, Pat Martino gave me guitar lessons. Oh yeah, I got to hang out with Stevie Ray. Like all these things that like I dreamed about. But and all seriousness, this is really cool. So you were recording
And
something.
you know what? You didn't put it on the list that I stole your horse and shot your third grade teacher.
Yeah. We'll
You're
get
not
to
even mad at me for that stuff.
No, I let some things go. I'm not bitter.
You're like, whatever. I don't like that horse anyway.
Yeah, that's right. But it's interesting.
It's that Stevie shit that pisses me off.
Oh yeah, I'm never gonna let that go. So you're recording something for them, right? A song for them. Was this the album they did like 5 or 6 years after Stevie had died? When was this?
Well, it was shortly after that, but it didn't have anything to do with that. In 2000, which was 10 years after Stevie passed, they put out a Double Trouble album. It's the only one they made, called Been a Long Time on Tone Cool Records. And I went down there, and that actually, not to go off on a tangent, but because Guitar World asked me to write a cover story 10-year anniversary of Stevie's passing, I went down while they were making the record, and I spent 3 days down there, and I stayed at Tommy Shannon's house, and I came back with 14 90-minute tapes of conversations. And because I'm crazy, when I got home, I transcribed all of it, and it was like 95 pages. All those years later, when Alan Paul, my co-writer for the Stevie Ray Vaughan book, he had written a book about the Allman Brothers, One Way Out, that was a successful book. St. Martin said, "You want to write another book?" He said, "Yeah, I'd like to write a book about Stevie, but I want to do it with my friend Andy, because Andy knew Stevie, he got to play with him, and he became friends with Double Trouble." By the time I got to 2000, I had gotten to know, during that 10-year period after Stevie died, I got to know Chris and Tommy really well. When they put Archangels together, I talked to them about that band, and they did Storyville, and I talked to them about that band. And then I started sending them recordings of my playing, and they liked it. And so by the late 90s, they had me come and do some sessions with them and play some live shows with them, which was great. And James, it was very connected to also just becoming friends with them, having met them back when Stevie was alive. And then we, of course, had these, incredibly heart-wrenching conversations about, what had happened, this, terribly tragic event in their lives. They're both wonderful people, so a friendship took place, and then we discovered that we liked to play music together too, and thankfully they liked my guitar playing. I don't know what year it was. It might have been 2003 or 4. I went down to do some sessions with them. We got to a point in the sessions, and the engineer said, okay, well, everything's done. Like, you accomplished everything you needed to do, but you have an extra half hour of studio time booked. And so I just looked at them and said, can we record one of my songs? And they said, yeah, show it to us. That's the song on the album called Have Mercy on Me. So, without exaggeration, in 1 minute, I showed them how it went. Like, it starts like this, it's like a blues, but it has some other chords, and it has a bridge, and literally, the way I'm explaining it to you is how I explain it to them. We go to F and go to D, and then you go to D with an E bass, and then it goes back to the verse. And there's a lick, at the end of the form. That's it. We cut it one time. We go into the 5 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever it is. That's how long it took. Song ends, we go into the control room to listen. Tommy has his bass. Tommy says to me, there's a couple spots. I don't think I really played exactly the right thing. Let me punch those spots. We did that. That took maybe 15 minutes at the most for him to punch in where he wasn't happy with what he played. And then I carried that session for 18 years or something, planning to put vocal and lead guitar on it because it was just rhythm guitar, bass and drums. Basic track, completely live. Other than Tommy's tiny little punch-ins. Chris's drumming's phenomenal. And just the way those guys play, like if you listen to the song and try to not listen to the lead guitar and the vocal and just listen to rhythm guitar, bass, and drums, there's so much integration in what we're playing. Chris's drumming's tremendous, and anything I do on rhythm guitar has to do with what he's playing on drums, and it's just, those guys are unbelievable. That's why they're considered one of the greatest rhythm sections of all time. So one taker. So whenever it was, in October probably, so 5 months ago, my intention was to put on a lead guitar and lead vocal that was also live from beginning to end, so that the track would be as live as possible. The backing track was 99% live, 98% live, other than these little punch-ins. And so I stood there with the vocal mic, the amp in the other room, super loud, so it was all bleeding into the mic, which you want, and I was going for a total Hendrix Red House, which is completely live in the studio, or Johnny Winter, Be Careful with a Fool. It's totally live in the studio, all guitar bleeding into the vocal mic on both those recordings, which is part of the vibe, it sounds live in the studio. Bob hit record, and I just played for I traveled the trip from the beginning of the song to the end. We went back and fixed the spots where I forgot how to play and forgot how to sing. It was horrible. But I mean, without exaggeration, it's 85%. Like the journey, like the things that I played have to do just like in a live performance. I played what I played because of what I played previously. It's very live in the singing and guitar, because like Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix, what they play, or I should say what they sing, is completely connected to what they're playing on the guitar. The vocal and guitar are of one, so it worked out really well. Like I sent the track to, this is the name dropping portion of the show. I sent the track to Joe Bonamassa and Joe Perry and Joe Satriani, all Joes. But 3 guys that have become friends over the years.
You're killing me, but please continue.
And Andy Timmons, I forgot.
Well, let's throw Andy in there too.
Timmons also is the best. All of them said, wow, like it really sounds live, like you really captured what sounds like a completely live performance. Bonamassa, who this is really his thing, he says, I know how hard it is to get a convincing live sounding blues thing in the studio. It's hard to do. And he goes, but it sounds raw and raucous, is what he said. And
I'm your guy that tweets for you. Tweet that.
oh, I should.
Raw and raucous.
Well, the next issue of Guitar World, the June issue, Andy Timmons, I sent him the whole record really early on, like while we were working on it. I just sent him tracks. And he said, at one point, he said, you know what? He said, I want to interview you for Guitar World about the record because I love it so much. So we did that, and Guitar World was kind enough to run it. So the next issue has a feature story in it where Andy interviews me about the record, and we talk about things that we're talking about right now, how some of the songs go back 28 years and how that happened. And he also recognized this sort of two-prong thing of like, you got to cut a song with Double Trouble, which is super cool. And then the song is a very good example of why Double Trouble are so phenomenal, because it's blues. It's blues with a twist, which is what Stevie did with them. There's definitely a rock, intensity to it. So it's very much the same in that way. It's not traditional blues, and most of what Stevie did was not traditional blues. And so it's sort of perfect for them and their playing. I feel very lucky. I have a track that I was able to record with Double Trouble. It was very shortly after that they stopped recording together. So I don't think they've even made a recording together. Maybe since right around that time, maybe 2005. I'm not even sure.
Because I've heard Tommy's had some health issues. Is that right?
Tommy has gone through some health issues. But, in 2019, as you know, when the Stevie Ray Vaughan book came out, which is going to be 3 years ago, which is impossible to believe because
COVID. Time doesn't mean anything with COVID.
The
right?
2-year COVID thing is just like a,
yep.
men in black, mind eraser. He was feeling so much better that he came to the book signing we did in Austin at Book People, sat at the table for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Signing books and talking to people. And then he came to the tribute jam we did and got up and played a few songs. So Tommy is much better.
Good.
He's not playing. He doesn't want to play. As far as he's concerned, he's retired from playing. He isn't playing, but his health is much better. So
good.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, because I saw the Archangels are doing, I assume you've seen this too, they're doing a reunion tour.
Yes, but
and it's everybody but Tommy.
But they did a reunion. They've been doing a reunion shows going back to, I don't know, I think they did some in 2004, and Tommy wasn't on those either.
Yeah.
So Tommy has been out of the Archangels picture for a long time.
Yeah, it's just always fun to see Chris play. I mean, like you said, so good. And he kind of came from a non-traditional background, right? Wasn't he a jazz guy or something? He wasn't just a straight ahead rock guy. I think that was why Stevie first liked hearing him play, unless I'm misremembering that.
No, you're very correct. It's the story's super cool because Chris loved jazz. He loved rock and soul and R&B, of course, and Hendrix. And me and Chris are the same age. What were the records that we were listening to when we were 11 and 12 years old? We were listening to Cream and Ginger Baker and listening to Hendrix and Mitch Mitchell, or then, Band of Gypsies comes out and it's Buddy Miles, or Who and Keith Moon, or Led Zeppelin and John Bonham, there was no shortage of really, really, really good drummers to listen to in those days. Or Ringo. Let's not give Ringo a short shrift. His drumming on the Beatles albums is phenomenal. That's your schooling you grow up with as a musician. So Chris has the same schooling as me in that regard. But a lot of drummers of, my age group were more so than like the last 20 years. Would get the drum books. If you got a drum teacher, it would be rudiments right away. Stick control books, like a very structured learning. That's how people played in the 60s. into the early 70s. For example, Jim Marshall, the guy who invented Marshall amplifiers, was a drummer. And his shop in England is where he gave drum lessons. Because American amps were too expensive to afford, he hired a guy named Ken Brand and said, just copy those Fender amps and we'll call them Marshalls, and we won't have all this. The price will be lower because we don't have to add that to the price of the amp. But his drum students were guys like Ian Pace from Deep Purple and Rick Lee from 10 Years After. Mitch Mitchell wanted to be his drum student and wasn't, and I think he worked at the shop for like a day or something. But my point is only that drummers from that era basically learned the Buddy Rich, extremely disciplined way of playing drums. Traditional grip, like everything.
Yeah.
If you wanted to play like Mitch, if you wanted to play like those guys, that you're hearing on records, you needed to have your rudiments, your Rademachews and your paradiddles. You better have that stuff together. So Chris came from a very structured background in terms of playing the drums. He didn't come from blues. Like I listen to blues records, and I'm just a guy who's like, he wasn't that at all. Mm-hmm. And then he was in a band called La Paz in Corpus Christi with Joe Sublette, and this was 1972, and they were playing like the music you would play in 1972 and 73. They were playing Grover Washington, Mr. Magic, Headhunters, Herbie Hancock, a lot of funk, rock, fusion. And then he moves to Austin and joins a country rock band because Cosmic Cowboy music was becoming a thing. So he's in this band called Greasy Wheels, playing music that's not unlike Asleep at the Wheel or Doug Sam or, like stuff like that. Still not blues at all. So it was just by happenstance that he saw Stevie play at Soap Creek when Stevie was in Paul Ray and the Cobras. And one night their drummer, Rodney Craig, who worked as a roofer during the day, and then he would go home and take a nap and then wake up to go. He didn't wake up. Joe Sublette, who was the sax player in Paul Ray and the Cobras, was Stevie's roommate. Whipper was in the audience.
He Wally pipped him.
And, they moved to Austin together from Corpus. And they're like, there's no Rodney. Like, we got to start. It's Tuesday night. The place is packed. Joe says, well, let's get Chris up. Like, I've been playing with him forever, Forever being like 3 years at that point. And apparently everybody was like hemming and hawing, like, when's Rodney coming? Like, they're going to want some guy. Like, no one knows whether he could play. And Joe was like, just get Chris. Like, just get Chris up. Chris can play. And so Chris, it tells the story in the book that he was nervous, like he wasn't a blues drummer. Obviously, he did a good enough job. Stevie came over the house a couple days later. One of the interesting things in the book is Chris said that he had heard from Joe, like recently, like in the last 5 years, he never knew this, that Stevie pulled up in front of the house and Joe was outside. So they had a conversation before Stevie went in the house. And Chris was inside practicing to Donny Hathaway Live with these headphones and like this 30-foot cable that he had made, distance between the stereo and his drum set. Stevie asked Joe, he said, I thought Chris sounded good. Do you think can he play blues? And Joe said, I don't know. Like he's not a blues drummer. I mean, he's just not. And Stevie said, maybe this will be good because I can have an influence on like how he'll play blues. You know what I mean? Like if I say listen to this or do this or it needs to, like Stevie had been playing with Freddie Farrow and guys that were dyed-in-the-wool blues players. Yep. And it's nothing against them, but they played the way they played. And Stevie looked at it as actually an opportunity to play with a guy, because Stevie himself had wider tastes than just blues. Yeah. So Chris says when he came in and he saw that Stevie saw that Chris was playing to Donny Hathaway Live, he said, oh God, this is one of my favorite records in the world. And I'll add one other thing to this I think is interesting. At that time, Stevie had put together, actually it was a ways later, because Stevie had left the Cobras, formed Triple Threat Review. Freddie Walden was the drummer, Freddie Farrow, in Triple Threat. Band changed to Double Trouble, and Chris was the drummer with Jackie Newhouse on bass, Lou Ann Barton singing, and then Lou Ann quit, and then they were a trio, and there's that record called In the Beginning from 1980, which is Stevie and Chris Layton and Jackie Newhouse. But in 1980, Tommy Shannon, who had been through a lot of stuff, who had met Stevie in 1969 when Stevie was 14 years old, and they played together in Crackerjack in 1972 or 3, and then by then Stevie was 17 or something. Tommy had lost everything, as a result of being a drug addict, and by 1980 he was finally back playing, back in the swing, sees Stevie play in Houston, and says to him, I need to be your bass player. He sat in. Everybody thought he sounded great. Tommy became the bass player. Now here's my point in all of this long story. Tommy's initial success was as the bass player with Johnny Winter on the first 2 Johnny Winter albums with Uncle John Turner on drums, who is a phenomenal drummer. Certainly one of the best blues drummers that was a white guy that was from the late 60s era of rock, but he was really came from blues. Now Tommy's in the band, and Chris Layton's the drummer. I think that because Tommy and Unc were so close, they may have had conversations. I mean, this came from Unc, from my conversations with Unc, just so you know, it's not something that was making up or is totally hearsay. I think at some point, Tommy was like, hey, well, maybe, we'll get you to play drums for Stevie. And reunite ourselves as a rhythm section, because they had made the records with Johnny Winter. Unc said to me, he said, if I had replaced Chris as the drummer in Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, I don't think they would have been successful the way they were with Chris as the drummer, which is an amazing thing to say, because Unc is a phenomenal drummer. And his point was exactly your point, that it was because Chris was not a regular blues drummer. He played from this other sensibility that had pop in it, R&B in it, and it had a fresher, it just wasn't blues.
Mm-hmm.
It was a different sound. And here's Unc himself saying, I wasn't the right drummer for that band. Chris was.
Yeah.
That's so cool, I think.
Yeah, most guys won't do that just because of ego alone, right? They'll be
exactly.
Like, yeah,
they'll say, "Oh, I should have been me." I would have done a better job than Chris for the same reason. Chris isn't a blues drummer. He's not the greatest blues drummer in the world. And that's what Stevie needs. And so there were other drummers that made comments like that, but Unc was wise enough to go, no. There's something going on with those 3 guys that if you just listen, you'll hear it.
Mm-hmm. No, totally.
And they heard it. You know what I mean? Like between Stevie and Tommy and Chris, they were aware that there was something different about the way they sounded. They did not sound like any blues band on a Monday night.
Which is what made them them.
Absolutely.
There's and I know I'm not going to slag. I'm not obviously bringing anybody up, and I'm not going to slag anybody. But like you said earlier, it wasn't straight blues per se. I mean, you can hear, Chitlin's Con Carne, the jazz influences, or Staying Swang, which's got some jazz in it, like the straight rock and roll tunes. They did it all. I mean, it's for a lack of a better name, people called it blues rock, but they had all kinds of things that you could hear. If you listen to it, you can hear their influences in what they're listening to. And, Stevie Ray was got to be one of the few blues guys that was that like into Wes Montgomery and stuff. There's not a lot of, blues guys. That
Grant Green and
Yeah.
and Hendrix. So Stevie didn't play like a traditional blues guitar player at all. You can hear the influences. You can hear Otis Rush and in particular Albert King, and you can hear B.B. King. But Stevie didn't sound that way. His sound was totally a rock sound. 5,000 foot tall Stratocaster. I mean, when I saw Stevie for the first time live in 1984, it was at a little club on Long Island that was 5 minutes from here called My Father's Place. Held maybe 250 people. And James, I I had three thoughts, like during the first song, or maybe by the time the second song started. Which one? It was the greatest live Stratocaster tone I ever heard in my life, by far. Like, it wasn't even a contest. It was like, you know, ridiculous. Stevie played guitar like a guy eating a sandwich. It was just nothing for him to play that way. It just seemed beyond effortless to play like that on this. That was mind blowing in and of itself. And he just had his head down like the whole time. But then at one point, he was holding a note, and the hat came up a little, and all you could see was his grin on his face. And then the hat went back down. And it was just, I'll never forget that. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And then his vibrato was perfect. Just perfect.
Yeah.
And I walked out of that like, this guy is truly extraordinary. Like, he wasn't just a blues guitar player. He had this virtuosity and way of playing the instrument that was extraordinary. And it came through in his playing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for him to be matched with people, that's why it's no discredit to Jackie Newhouse when he was replaced by Tommy. Jack would be the first one to tell you that Tommy was a better bass player for Stevie for the same reason. Tommy came from Johnny Winter, which was blues rock. Tommy sounds like a rock guy playing blues.
Yeah.
He doesn't sound like a blues guy playing blues.
It's so funny you bring that up because I saw him in February of '86. I played piano, Andy. I was a piano player.
Uh-huh.
Omaha, the music auditorium next to the Civic Auditorium. I'm 17 years old, and the mid '80s, there was so much process keyboard crap that I just hated. And I kind of knew who he was, but it wasn't like that big because it was before the internet.
Sure.
And he blew my mind away. He just blew me away. And
Yeah.
I literally picked up the guitar within a week. Like,
Oh, that's awesome.
because it's like, and I'm never going to be able to do that. But I was like, I want to do that. Like, that's cool what that guy's doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky. I got to know him, interviewed him 4 times, and, he would, I guess my old guitar is put away, but he would sit and play my old 61 Strat every time we got together, and there's 2 pictures of him in the book. We should say for your listeners, Texas Flood, The Inside Story of Stevie Ray Vaughan. One picture that I took of him playing my guitar, and then he had his press agent was this extremely infamous guy named Charles Comer, who had been the press agent for the Beatles when they first came to the States, and the Who, and the Rolling Stones. Very colorful Scottish guy who looked sort of like W.C. Fields, older guy. He was very funny. His commentary's in the book, and it's talked about how instrumental he was in helping Stevie become successful because he was such a great press agent. He made the thing happen in Rolling Stone, the photo of Stevie sitting with Mick Jagger. This was before Stevie had a record deal, and nobody knew Stevie Ray Vaughan was. Like, why is there a picture of this guy, in random notes in, page 6 of Rolling Stone? Here's some guy sitting with Mick Taylor on a couch. Charlie made these things happen. So Charlie was there, and I had just taken the picture of Stevie, and Charlie has this heavy Scottish accent, and he's like, "Give me the camera, I want to take a picture of you and Stevie together." He said, Steedy Day Vaughan. And I go, no, that's okay. And he's like, "Get over there. Everybody wants their picture with Stevie. Get over there." And he insisted. In the picture, we're both laughing, me and Stevie, because it was very funny. But I'm certainly thankful that Charlie made us do it. Getting to know him was a terrific thing, and then being able to write the book and assistance from Jimmy Vaughan and the blessing from him was very, very important. And then the whole Vaughan family, the cousins all participated, bandmates and peers, people from his high school band, Liberation. Jim Tremere was the sax player. We got it was like from day one, the early year stuff is always the hardest stuff to research. once somebody becomes famous and there's press on them, it's easy to, anytime you read a biography of a famous person, you can usually tell how good the writer is based on the first few chapters, because that's the real work. Before the guy's famous, you got to really work to find out, get some reliable sources on who this person is. Once they're famous, there's press, it's much easier. And then, once Stevie became a working and famous guitar player, guys like David Grissom or Eric Johnson, became close with him, and they were very involved in writing the book. So, of course, after having gotten to know them and record with them and stay with them 22 years ago, when it came time to write the book starting in 2017, this foundation had already been laid for a long time of the closeness to Chris and Tommy, and that enabled us to write the book, which enabled us to record that track. I don't think they would have said, sure, show it to us,
Right.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And I will put in the show notes, obviously, and people can listen to our earlier conversation. I talked to Alan as well. There's a conversation with Alan about, I love the book. I have it. Whenever you come to Kansas City or I get to New York, I'm going to have you sign it. It's a great book. And I'm a huge Stevie Ray nerd. I learned a lot, to your earlier point about doing the research and stuff. So it's great. I could talk to you forever, and not just because you name dropped all these people just to, put the dagger in my heart, Andy, but just because you're really interesting. But I think it's really, we had talked a little bit earlier about Pat Martino, and we just lost Pat.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know who Pat Martino is, if you play a guitar and you don't know who Pat Martino is, shame on you. Pat was so great, had such a great career. Obviously, he overcame a huge health issue, and we don't have time probably to get into that. But I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit, how was Pat as a person and as a teacher? What was it like for you?
Well, just to bring it back to the record for a second, Light of Love, there's a song called Untitled, which is sort of a jazzy instrumental track with a lot of guitar soloing. And so, probably more so than any other song, you can hear the Pat Martino influence in the playing on that song because of the style of the music, and it was that approach to soloing, and more of a jazzy approach, suited the song. In 1978, for 3 months, I went to his apartment on Jane Street in New York City. I had first learned of him in 1973, probably, hearing Pat Martino live on the radio, his version of Sunny, which is extremely famous. I mean, nobody played anything like that. His technical ability was beyond that of almost anyone. And then the Bottom Line opened around 74, and I went to see him at the Bottom Line in 74. And then in 75, he came back, and he had made the Joyous Lake album. So I saw the Joyous Lake tour. Anybody who's familiar with that, it's more jazz fusion-y. He had two 1,200-watt Crown power amps. That was his guitar amp.
That's not very jazzy.
Clean. We're talking about clean.
Yeah.
And then he was playing an L5S, this big solid body with 15s on it, ripping the daylights out of it. And you can't have a cleaner sound than that. So I was well familiar with him and his music and everything. And then a buddy of mine said, oh, there's an ad in the Village Voice that he's giving lessons. So, the first time I went, I was scared out of my mind. It's Pat Martino. He's like one of my biggest heroes. Sweetest person. And, James, he was probably 37 years old then in 78. I have to think about it. No, he's even younger because he was born in 44. So that would make him 34 years old.
That sounds really young now, doesn't it?
Sure does. And so by the second or third lesson, I started forgetting that he was Pat Martino, the guy that, was on Mount Olympus. And he was just this guy that I went and took lessons from. Who, forget it, he would just pick up the guitar and he would play like Pat Martino and 1 inch from my face. And he'd go, oh, it's just this, you know what I mean? And I go, no, I don't know what you mean. Show me. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like that. What is that? What is happening?
Yeah.
And then he performed somewhere and I went to see him, and then it just reset he blew my mind totally. So the next time I went back, I was scared out of my mind again. But he was like a guru. James, he made you feel like, without exaggeration, that if you had music in your life, your life was full and you didn't need anything else. You knew that you loved music and you loved the guitar and you were going to dedicate yourself to playing music in an earnest way with everything that you could bring to it. That you didn't need anything else in your life. That music and the guitar would give you your sustenance. And I would walk out of there, and I'm not exaggerating, feeling like I was pushing myself down from the ceiling. I just float out of there on cloud 900. I mean, the most positive. It was too much. And I would say to him, share with him my frustrations at the time, like feeling, oh, it's hard to learn and I can't get where I want to get. And how do I become better, become a better musician? Like, how does it happen? Like, I'm practicing 7 hours a day. I feel like it isn't happening. And he had incredible advice. And, he was just, really was like a guru. And on my first album, Put a Sock in It, in 95, my dad passed away. And I wrote a song for him that's a instrumental solo jazz guitar piece called For My Father. But the style of it is very much in Pat Martino style. And my thought was, the song was for my father, but also that Pat had been a real musical father to me. And so it was sort of a tribute to how I felt about him and what he gave me and how he was a musical parent to me and helped me in that moment, if you will, of trying to express through a piece of music my feelings about my father. And so it came out on Put a Sock in It in 99, and I sent it to Pat, and then I went to see him play at the Blue Note shortly thereafter, not knowing if he had even received it or certainly if he had listened to it. And he finished the show, and he was still on stage talking to people, and I was just waiting my turn. And then, the opportunity came, and I was standing in front of him, and he saw me. And he reached down, and he put both his hands on the sides of my face. And he said, "You made a beautiful record." So...
That made your whole life, man.
It sure did. And then, I would continue to go see him. We stayed in touch. I called him in, 2012 to do an interview with him. And he answers the phone. I said, "Pat, how are you doing?" He says, "I'm good." He said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm good, trying to learn how to play guitar." And Pat goes, "Join the club."
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's so interesting, and then we'll wrap up with talking about your upcoming plans for the new album. But it seems to me, at least, the guys that I've met that are the best, they're just phenomenal players. Seem very generous, seem very secure, and are not like, "Oh, I don't want to teach you my secrets." Like, they're very open and very encouraging. I mean, every guy I've met that's just blows my mind that I know a little bit. Really nice people.
Well, it certainly seems to be that being a beautiful, warm, compassionate, generous person goes along with being an amazing player. Because I've had the exact same experience. All of the greatest guys that we know as musicians that I've had the good fortune to meet and talk to have also been the most wonderful people you could ever talk to. And the first example I always think of is B.B. King, because you can't be a more well-known or influential guitar player than B.B. King. B.B. King influenced everyone, but not just in blues.
Mm-hmm.
He influenced every single guitar player, certainly in jazz and blues, more than any other guitar player. And you would not be able to find a kinder, more generous, more congenial person than B.B. King. When I met him the first time in 1985 to interview him, I brought him a transcription I had done of Sweet Little Angel from Live at the Regal. And it was already printed in the magazine, in the brand new issue of Guitar for the Practicing Musician. And I go in the dressing room with him, and it was this little side room, and in the main room, his whole family was there. It was at Westbury Music Fair, which is close here on Long Island. So there were all these women and kids and people, 20 people in the main room, all talking and eating. And so he said, "Well, we'll go in the other little dressing room." And we went in there. And the first thing I showed him the magazine, And BB King I saw on like the Mike Douglas show when I was
Mm-hmm.
12 or something, and I freaked out. You know, I said to my mother, "Buy me one of those 335s so I can learn to play like that." I show him the transcription of Sweet Little Angel, and it's all standard notation and tab, and he looks at it and he goes, "Well, it's all, it looks great and everything." He goes, "But I can't read music." So I took my finger and I did like a follow the bouncing ball.
Mm-hmm.
Got a sweet little angel. I love the way she spread her wings. And then I sang the guitar licks and with my finger going, so you could see. So he just looks at me and goes, "Sounds like BB King." So he takes my arm, opens the door to the other room where all the people are talking. And he goes, "Hey, hey, 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 be quiet, hey." And they all just stop and look. And he goes, "I want everybody to meet my friend Andy. He's an incredible musician. So everybody say hi to Andy." I mean, I met him 1 minute before that. And then he signed my transcription. So forget it, man. And then I interviewed him a bunch of times over the years. And so, yeah, whether we're talking about John Schofield is a guy I've got to become really close friends with. Certainly Pat Martino, Mike Stern, Pat Metheny. I
Who's
did a
from
book.
here?
I did a book with Pat Metheny. Lee Summit. I don't know how close Lee Summit is.
It's just a suburb, dude. It's just a suburb of Kansas City.
Oh, because he would play in Kansas City. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, this is the town. I know people that know him, but he's been gone for, I don't know, 50 years, a long time.
And then his brothers played as
Yeah,
well.
Mike's here. He's still here. Mike lives here. Plays trumpet.
Everybody plays trumpet except Pat, and Pat apparently played trumpet too in the beginning. And when we worked on the book, all he cared about was trumpet players. I'm
Interesting.
not joking. I would be rewriting the chart, and he would say, "Well, we have to write it so trumpet players can read it." And I'm like, "It's a guitar book."
Right.
And he was like, "I don't care." All he cared about was trumpet players.
That might be something that he wants to talk to, somebody who's in the psychology field, why he needs what's going on there. But that's interesting. Obviously, Pat's another one, just great.
But yeah, it seems to be one of those things that, and Stevie Ray Vaughan was also just a very warm person, like really good guy, no head trips or no BS, nothing, anything like that. I got getting to become friends with Johnny Winter was crazy to me, and Johnny could be cranky and stuff, but for the most part, 99.9%, he was hysterically funny and sweet and warm and forget it, like you've got Hendrix for me, and then you have, all the other, Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton and Johnny Winter and Dwayne Allman and Leslie Weston and Richie Blackmore, my next level. Hendrix is alone on the top, but right below are all those other people. That's where Johnny Winter was. So to get to know him and sit in his living room with him and be playing National Steels in Johnny's living room, just the two of us, James, I'm like, this is the guy I saw at Madison Square Garden in '73.
Mm-hmm.
Same guy. That's too crazy.
That's why I do this podcast. I'm not making any money.
Well,
just to hang out with cool people like you. So totally.
Well, what you do is a wonderful service because it's keeping these people's memory and their music alive by talking about them and inspiring and encouraging people to listen to them and think about them and learn about them.
Absolutely.
Because there's only one Johnny Winter that ever came down the pike, and you could say the same about every one of these guys. There's no other BB King that's going to show up.
Yep. Well, and then we really will wrap up. But we're doing I have a day job and stuff, and I'm putting on this thing. We have some people coming over from the EU, and we're putting together this whole thing about Kansas City and the Kansas City Sound and the Kansas City Stomp and all these great players and stuff. And you just forget, Andy, how little people know. So I'm walking this lady through this, like, okay, we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about Jay McShann and we're going to talk about, Count Basie, and we're going to talk about Mary Lou Williams, and and at one
Is
point,
it the Blue Devils from Kansas City too?
yeah, the Blue Devils started out in Oklahoma, but they came here because Kansas City, wide open town, right? And all those guys were here, Lester Young. And she looked me square in the eye and as earnest and no sarcasm, absolutely. She was like, can we get some of those people to be? And I was like, they're all dead. What are you talking about? Like, how do you not know this? But people don't. That's why I said, like, shame on you if you're a guitar player, you don't know about, you would hope they would know about Pat Martino, but they might not. And it's good to know about all those people because, as you said, they pay it forward and they influence the whole next generation and on and on and on. You can draw a straight line through those people.
Pat Martino put out from his personal collection just about a year or two ago something called Young Guns. Him and Gene Ludwig on B3, and the drummer's name escapes me, but it's just his gig, like in New Jersey, I think. That was in his personal collection, and Pat's 25 maybe. Young Guns. And James, it's just, you can't even believe it. And I've been listening to Pat Martino for 50 years.
Right.
And I can't believe it. It's so phenomenal. And so, it's getting to know him. It's such a beautiful thing when there's a musician whose music means so much to you. And then you get to know them as a person. So this whole other part of the equation gets filled out.
That's great.
And, but I think that part of the reason part of their greatness is they communicate that uniqueness of their spirit through their music. So even if you never had the opportunity to know them or they died, like Charlie Parker did, long before we were born, you still feel like you knew them because their spirit is there in the music. You do know them. You know their uniqueness as people through the way they express themselves through music.
Absolutely. So what are the plans with the new album, Light of Love? That's why we're here. Are you touring? Yeah. What are you going to do with it?
I don't have an agent for touring. One of the bands I have is called Friends of the Brothers, which is an Allman Brothers thing, and we recently got picked up by a booking agent, Mint Talent, CJ Strock, and so I'm hoping that CJ will book me as well, but that hasn't happened yet. He just started booking Friends of the Brothers. So for the time being, we're coming out of COVID too, so finally back to booking a lot of gigs. Every gig, starting when the record came out, at the end of January, has been a record release party. And even since January, the COVID thing has gone up and down a little. When Omicron showed up, there were gigs, and then we had to cancel them because Omicron was here. And now we're not even that much after that. It's like 6 weeks later, and it's like, all the mandates have been lifted, and we're back to full-blown whatever. Mm-hmm. So you have to keep your fingers crossed, and, So there's a lot of gigs. So for the time being, I'll be, all my gigs will be record release party gigs. And they're just going to be local, tri-state, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and that's the plan. And the first thing is adding as many songs as possible to the live set of these originals because the band's never played them. But we have 7 that we're doing. We just played a gig Friday, this past Friday, and did the whole end of the first set was all straight from the record, and so we're going to keep adding songs, and hopefully, we just, keep playing and keep adding songs from the record, and then hopefully get to the point where we do a whole night that's just songs from the album, and entire gigs that are just original music, which would be the way to go. So sounds great. I need to get back to New York. And I have to say, yes, you do. But I have to say that I'm writing more than ever. I have enough for a triple album at this point, like in the can. And I don't want to follow a double with a triple or another double. I don't think that's a good idea. So I'm going to have to get my shit together and figure out what are the 10 songs, 9, 10 songs they're going to make be the next record. And then save up some money, to be able to go
Record it. Yeah.
But I don't want to do it too soon too, because this is a double album. It's a lot of music, so it needs that much more time to gestate out there.
Sure. Well, like I said, I could talk all day. You're always so kind with your time. It's always a joy to talk
As
to you.
are you. Thank you so much.
It's always so much fun. Yes, I need it. Before COVID, I'd make it to New York about once a year or once every 18 months or so. So hopefully soon. I was supposed to be there, of course, in June of 2020, and that didn't happen.
Right.
I would love to get out there. It's always so much fun to come out. And
Or if I get lucky, I'll come out to Kansas City.
thanks so much. Have a great week, man.
Okay, thanks, man. I'll
Take
talk
care.
to you soon.
Andy Aledort, everyone. Down in the show notes, links to Light of Love. Check it out. Andy is always just a joy to talk to. So many great stories. Has played with so many cool people. The Pat Martino thing, man, that almost got me a little choked up. Have somebody who is that great of a guitarist validate you that way. Same with B.B. King. Like I said, I found the people that are the most talented have been the nicest to me. And that's without exception. So that's so cool. So that's going to do it for this time. But next time, Andy Timmons. Yes, Andy Timmons. I know, 2 Andys in a row. 2 guitar gurus named Andy in a row. I'm on a theme. I didn't even know it. He's going to be on next week. He's got a new album that is coming off, hot off the presses. We are going to discuss that at length. And then a lot of other cool stuff. So the album is called Electric Truth. That is 1 week from today. Until then, go out, support live music, and we'll talk real soon. Bye-bye.
For the very last time, going up for a ride. Falling through the night, trying to make everything alright. Waiting outside your door, trying to get a little more. What would I find at this time on one last ride, lost in time?